So, hello and welcome back to our final night with Jules Verne, at least until I find some more Jules Verne books, because I've really been enjoying. Honestly, I really like his writing style, and I'm going to have to keep an eye out for more Jules Verne because he's just entertaining, and I've really enjoyed this book. I mean, it's taken me in all sorts of different directions, and now we're finally getting to the end of Journey to the Center of the Earth, which is a little bittersweet, and I'm not sure how in 3 chapters we can actually finish this book, considering they haven't made it to the center of the Earth yet. But maybe they just won't. I mean, I guess that's always possible, that they'll just have gone really deep, but not all the way down. I guess the only way to find out for sure, though, is to jump back in and hear from the man himself and see what's going on. We were hurtling back upwards on a column of very hot water, and it was getting hotter the further up they went, which seems a little counterintuitive, but I'm sure it will all be explained if we jump back in and see what's going on. So let's do that. Let's finish up Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne, beginning with chapter 43. It was wild. The needle jumped from one pole to the other with abrupt jolts. The compass ran around the entire dial, and it spun as if it had been overcome by vertigo. I knew quite well that according to the most accepted theories, the mineral crust of the globe is never at absolute rest. The changes brought about by the decay of the interior substances, the movement deriving from the great liquid currents, and the impact of magnetism tended to change continually, even if the beings on its surface suspected nothing of this commotion. This phenomenon would therefore not have particularly frightened me, or at least it would not have provoked the dreadful ideas in my mind. But other facts, other unique details could not deceive me for much longer. The detonations multiplied with frightening intensity. I could only compare them to the noise of a great number of carriages driven across pavement. It was like continuous thunder. Then the compass gone wild, shaken up by electric phenomenon, confirmed my idea. The mineral crust was about to burst. The granite masses were about to fuse. The fissure was about to clog. The void was about to fill up. And we poor atoms were going to be crushed in this tremendous embrace. "Uncle," I shouted, "we're doomed." "What are you so worried about now?" came the calm reply. "What's the matter with you?" "The matter? Look, these walls are moving. This mass of rock is disintegrating. This burning heat, boiling water, the thickening steam, the wild compass needle, it's all indicators of an earthquake." My uncle just gently shook his head. "An earthquake," he said. "Yes!" "My boy, I think you're mistaken." "What? Don't you recognize the symptoms?" "Of an earthquake? No, I expect something better than that." "What do you mean?" "An eruption, Axel." "An eruption? We're in the chimney of an active volcano?" "Yes, I think so," said the professor with a smile. "And that is the best thing that could happen to us." The best thing? Had my uncle gone mad? What did these words mean? Why was he so calm? And why was he smiling? "What?" I yelled. "We're caught in an eruption? Fate has thrown us in the way of white-hot lava, burning rocks, boiling water, and all kinds of volcanic substances. We're going to be thrown out, expelled, ejected, vomited, coughed up high in the air along with pieces of rock, showers of ash, a whirlwind of flame, and that's the best thing that could happen to us? Yes, said my uncle, looking at me over his spectacles, because that's the only chance we have of returning to the surface of the earth. I passed rapidly over the 1,000 ideas that crossed my brain. My uncle was right. Absolutely right, and he had never seemed bolder or more convinced to me than this moment when he explained calmly and coolly and calculated the chances of us being ejected by an eruption. In the meantime, we still were going up. The night went by in this movement of ascent. The surrounding noise increased. I was almost choking. I thought my final hour had come, and yet imagination is so strange that I gave myself over to a really childish thought. But I was the victim and not the master of my thoughts. It was obvious that we were being driven upwards by an eruptive surge. Beneath the raft, there was boiling water, and underneath the water, a lava pulse, an assortment of rocks that would be hurled in all directions at the summit of the crater. So we were in the vent of a volcano. There was no doubt about that. But this time, instead of Snøfell's, an extinct volcano, we seemed to be inside a fully active one. I wondered, therefore, what mountain this might be. What part of the world would we be ejected in? In the northern regions, no doubt. Before it went wild, our compass had never deviated from the direction north. From Cape Sakmussen, we had been carried due north for hundreds of leagues, so were we back underneath Iceland? Would we be ejected out of the crater of Mount Helka or one of the 7 other volcanoes of that island? With a radius of 500 leagues to the west, I saw that latitude only the scarcely known volcanoes of the northwest coast of America. To the east, there was only a single one at 80 degrees northern latitude, the Esk in Jan Mayen Island, not far from Spitsbergen. Certainly there was no lack of craters, and they were spacious enough to vomit up an entire army, but here I was trying to guess which one of them was going to be our exit. As morning came, our ascent accelerated. If the heat increased instead of diminishing as we approached the surface of the globe, this was because it was a completely local due to the volcanic influence. Our type of movement could no longer leave any doubts in my mind. An enormous force, a pressure of several hundred atmospheres generated by the steam, was pushing us along, but to what dangers it was exposing us. Soon, tawny reflections penetrated into the widening vertical tunnel. To the right and left, I noticed deep openings that looked like enormous tunnels from which thick steam was escaping, and tongues of fire were lapping the walls and crackling. "Look, Uncle!" I shouted. Well, those are sulfurous flames, nothing more natural during an eruption. But what if they engulf us? They won't. What if we choke? We're not going to choke, he said. The tunnel is widening, and, if necessary, we'll abandon the raft and we'll take shelter in a crevasse. But the water? You know, the rising water? There is no more water, Axel. Only a sort of lava paste, which is carrying us up to the outlet of the crater. The liquid column had indeed disappeared and given way to rather dense but still boiling eruptive matter. The temperature was becoming unbearable, and the thermometer exposed to this atmosphere probably would have marked over 70 degrees Celsius. I was streaming with sweat. Without the speed of our ascent, we certainly would have suffocated, but the professor did not carry out his proposal of abandoning the raft. Turns out he was right. Those few ill-fitted wooden beams offered us a solid surface, a support we would not have found anyplace else. Around 8 in the morning, another incident occurred for the very first time. Upward movement stopped suddenly. The raft lay absolutely still. "What's going on now?" I said, shaken by this stoppage as though by a shock. "A halt," said my uncle. "Is the eruption stopping?" "Oh, I hope not," he said. I rose. I tried to look around. Perhaps the raft itself, held up by a projection in the rock, was offering a temporary resistance to the volcanic mass. In that case, we had to hurry up and release it as quickly as we could, but it was not so. The column of ashes and rock fragments had itself also ceased rising. Might the eruption be coming to a halt? "Ah," said my uncle, clenching his teeth. "That's what you fear, my boy. But don't worry, this moment of calm can't last long. It's already been 5 minutes, and we'll soon resume our journey to the mouth of the crater." As he was saying this, the professor continued to check his chronometer, and he would again be right in his prediction. Soon the raft was seized yet again by a rapid, irregular movement that lasted about 2 minutes, and then stopped again. "Good," said my uncle, checking the time. "In 10 minutes it'll start again." 10 minutes? "Yes, we're dealing with an intermittent volcano. Let's breathe along with it." And nothing could be more true. At the predicted time, we were again hurled along at extreme speed. We were forced to grip the wood beams tightly so as not to be thrown off the craft, and then the surge stopped. I've since reflected on this strange phenomenon without finding a satisfactory explanation. At any rate, it was obvious that we were not in the main vent of the volcano, but a secondary tunnel that was subject to a reflux effect. How often this repeated itself, I cannot say. All I can say is that at each new start, we were hurled forward with an increasing force, as though carried along by a real projectile. During the short halts, we choked. During the movements of upward rush, the hot air would cut off my breath. I thought for a moment how delightful it would be to find myself suddenly transported to the Arctic regions and a cold of 30 Celsius below freezing. My overstimulated imagination went for a stroll on the snowy plains of Arctic lands, and I longed for a moment where I could roll on icy carpet near the pole. Little by little, at any rate, I lost my head, shattered by the repeated shocks. If it had not been for Hans's strong arm, I would have more than once broken my skull against the granite walls. I have therefore no exact memory of what happened during the next few hours. I have a confused recollection of continuous detonations, movement of rock, and a spinning movement that seemed to seize the craft. It was floating on the flood of lava amidst a hail of ashes. Flames engulfed it. A a hurricane seemed to come from an enormous ventilator kindled in the underground fires. One last time, Hans's face appeared to me in a reflection of fire, and then, well, then I no longer had any feeling other than the dark terror of the condemned tied to the mouth of a cannon at the moment when a shot is fired and scatters my limbs into the air. Well, that was quite the chapter. We do have a picture of our three travelers on their raft of fire. I'm going to get a drink, but yeah, I don't think a wooden raft is going to stand up well to lava, but that's okay. We're dealing with sci-fi, and I'll be right back. Well, that was exciting, wasn't it? All right, we've got 2 more chapters to figure out how they get out of this this fine mess that they've been put into. So we're going to continue on with chapter 44 of Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. When I opened my eyes again, I felt Hans's strong hand holding me by the belt. With the other hand, he was supporting my uncle. I was not seriously injured, but rather bruised and generally aching. I found myself lying on the slope of a mountain, 2 steps away from a chasm into which I would have fallen with the slightest movement. Hans had saved me from death while I was rolling down the side of the crater. "Where are we?" said my uncle, who seemed to me quite angry that we were back to the surface of the earth. Hans shrugged his shoulders. "In Iceland?" I said. "Nidge," said Hans. "What? Not Iceland?" said the professor. Hans must be mistaken, I told them, raising myself up. After the innumerable surprises of our journey, yet another amazing turn was in store for us now. I expected to see a mountain cone covered with eternal snow in the midst of the barren deserts of the northern regions under the pale rays of an Arctic sun up beyond the highest latitudes, but contrary to all of these expectations, my uncle, Hans, and I were mid-slope on a mountain charred by the heat of a sun that consumed us with its fire. I could not believe my eyes, but the all too real broiling of my body left me no room for doubt. We had come half naked out of the crater, and the sun, to which we had owed nothing for 2 months, was being generous to us with light and heat, and it was pouring floods of splendid radiation on us. When my eyes adjusted to this brightness, of which they had lost that habit, I used them to correct the errors of my imagination. At least, I wanted to be in Spitzbergen, and I was in no mood to give up that idea easily. The professor was the first one to speak, and he said, "Indeed, this doesn't look too much like Iceland." "But Jan Mayen Island?" I said. "No, it's not that either. This is no northern volcano with granite peaks and a snowcap." "Nonetheless..." "Look, Axel. Just look." Above our heads, at a height of at most 500 feet, we saw the crater of a volcano, from which a tall pillar of fire mixed with pumice stones, ash, and lava was shooting out every 15 minutes with a loud explosion. I could feel the heaving of the mountain, which was breathing like a whale, and from time to time ejected fire and wind from its blowhole. Beneath us, Down a rather steep slope, sheets of eruptive matter stretched over 800 or 900 feet, which meant that the volcano's total height was less than 300 fathoms. Its base disappeared into a real abundance of green trees, among which I noticed olive, fig, and some vines covered with purple grapes. This admittedly did not have the appearance of an Arctic region. When the eye moved beyond this green enclosure, it quickly lost itself on the waters of a quite admirable ocean or lake, which meant that this enchanted place was an island, barely a few leagues wide. To the east, I could see a little harbor with a few houses scattered around it, where boats of a peculiar shape were floating on the waves of azure water. Beyond that, groups of islands emerged from the watery plain, so numerous they looked like a big anthill. Off to the west, distant coasts lined the horizon. On some, there were blue mountains outlined in a harmonious arrangement, and on others, still farther, there appeared an extremely tall mountain with a plume of smoke at its summit. To the north, an immense expanse of water was glittering in the sunlight, with the top of masts of, or possibly the convex shape of wind-blown sails showing every so often. The unexpectedness of this spectacle increased its beauty 100 times over. "Where are we? Where are we?" I said. Hans closed his eyes with indifference, and my uncle just looked at me without understanding. "Whatever mountain this might be," he finally said, "it's very hot here. The explosions are still going on, and it really wouldn't be worth escaping from an eruption only to be hit on the head by a piece of rock. Let's go down and we'll find out what's going on. Besides, dying of hunger and thirst." Well, the professor was definitely not in a contemplative mood. I, for my part, would have stayed in this place for many hours, forgetting my exhaustion, but I had to follow my companions. The side of the volcano had a very steep bunch of slopes. We slid into real potholes full of ash and avoided lava streams that were flowing down like serpents of flame. While we climbed down, I chattered a lot, for my imagination was too full to not overflow into words. "We're in Asia," I said. "On the coasts of India, the islands of Malaysia, definitely, or maybe in the middle of the Pacific Islands. We have passed through half of the globe, and we have ended up almost in the antipodes of Europe." "What about our compass?" said my uncle. "Oh yeah, the compass. According to the compass, we've been going north." "So you're saying it lied?" "Lied?" "Unless you think this is the North Pole." "The North Pole? No, but..." This was a fact I could not actually explain. I didn't know what to think. But now we were approaching the greenery, which was quite the pleasure to look at. Hunger tormented me, and thirst as well. Thankfully, after 2 hours of walking, a pretty countryside appeared in front of our eyes, covered with olive, pomegranate trees, vines that looked as though they might belong to just everybody. What a pleasure it was to press these tasty fruits to our lips and to eat grapes by the mouthful from the purple vines. Not far away, I discovered a spring of fresh water in the grass under the delicious shade of trees, into which we plunged our faces and hands. Well, each of us surrendered to the sweetness of rest. A child appeared between two clusters of olive trees. "Ah," I said, Look, an inhabitant of this happy land." It was a poor little wretch, miserably clothed, rather sickly, and apparently very frightened at our appearance. Indeed, half naked, with unkempt beards, we probably looked quite bad, and unless this was a land of thieves, we were probably going to frighten the inhabitants. Just as the child was about to run away, Hans went after him and brought him back in spite of the child's cries and kicks. My uncle began by reassuring the child as well as he could, and he asked in quite good German, "What is this mountain called, my little friend?" The child made no answer. "Well, then," said my uncle, "we're not in Germany." And he said the same question again in English. Again the child said nothing. I was by now quite curious. "Is he mute?" said the professor, who, proud of his polyglottism, now reiterated the same question in French. Still silence. "Now let us try Italian," said my uncle, and he said, "Dove no samino?" "Yes, where are we?" I impatiently repeated. The child still made no answer. "Now then, won't you speak?" yelled my uncle, who was beginning to lose his temper, and shook the child by the ears. "Come si noma questa isola?" "Stromboli?" said the little shepherd, who then slipped out of Hans's hands and headed for the plain through the olive trees. We hadn't thought about that. Stromboli! What effect this unexpected name had to my imagination. We were right in the Mediterranean, in the middle of the mythological Aeolian archipelago, on the ancient Strong Isle where Aeolus kept the winds and the storms chained up. And those blue mountains curving up to the east were the mountains of Calabria. And that mountain rising up on the southern horizon, that was Mount Etna. Fierce Mount Etna. Stromboli? Stromboli, I repeated. My uncle accompanied me with his gestures and words. We were almost singing like a choir. What a journey. What a wonderful journey. Having entered through one volcano, we had exited through another, and the other one was more than 1,200 leagues away from Snaffels, and far away from that barren landscape of Iceland at the far edge of the world. The coincidences of the expedition had taken us into the heart of the most harmonious place on earth. We had exchanged the regions of perpetual snow for the ones of infinite green, and had left the grayish fog of the icy regions over our heads and come back to the azure skies of Sicily. After a most wonderful meal of fruit and fresh water, we set off again to reach the port of Stromboli. Revealing how we had arrived on the island did not seem advisable. Italians, with their superstitious tendency, would inevitably have cast us as demons vomited up from the pits of hell, so we had to resign ourselves to pretending we were the victims of a shipwreck. Far less glorious, but much, much safer. Along the way, I could hear my uncle murmuring, "But the compass that pointed due north, how do we explain that?" "Indeed," I told him, with a quite disdainful air, "it's just easier not to explain." "Absolutely not. A professor of Jotunheim unable to find the reason for a cosmic phenomenon would be a disgrace." As he spoke these words, my uncle, half naked, with his leather purse around his waist and adjusting his glasses on his nose, became once again more the fearsome professor of mineralogy. An hour after we left the olive groves, we arrived at the port of San Vicente, where Hans claimed the prize of his 13th week of service, which was paid out to him with warm hand clasps. At that moment, even if he was not sharing our natural emotion, Hans at least allowed himself an unusual expression of feeling. He lightly squeezed our hands, and he actually began to smile. And that is the end of chapter 44, and all we have is one more chapter. So after these messages, we'll be right back. I've really enjoyed this book. I almost don't want it to end, but we only have one chapter left, so let's finish this with chapter 45 of Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. This is the end of a story that even people who are not usually amazed at anything might refuse to believe. But I am armed in advance against incredulity. The Stromboli fishermen received us with the care that is due victims of a shipwreck. They gave us clothing and food. After 48 hours of waiting, a small rowboat took us to Messina on August 31st, where a few days of rest helped us to recover from all of our exhaustion. On Friday, September the 4th, we embarked on the steamer Volturne, one of the steamships used by the Imperial French Postal Service, and 3 days later we landed in Marseille, with only one worry left on our minds, that of the compass. This inexplicable fact was bothering me quite seriously. On the evening of September 9th, we arrived back in Hamburg. Martha's amazement and Graubin's joy I can't even begin to describe to you. "Now that you're a hero, Axel," said Graubin to me, "you won't need to leave me ever again." I looked at her. She was crying and smiling at the same time. I'll leave it to you to guess whether Professor Lindenbrock's return to Hamburg caused a sensation. Thanks to Martha's indiscretion, the news of his departure for the center of the earth had spread around the entire world. People refused to believe it, and when they saw him again, they refused even more to believe. But Hans's presence and various bits of information that had come from Iceland, well, it slowly changed public opinion. Then my uncle became a great man, and me the nephew of a great man, which is at least something. Hamburg gave a party in our honor. A public lecture took place at the Jotunheim, where the professor told the story of his expedition and omitted only the facts relating to the compass. That same day, he deposited Sakmussen's document in the municipal archives and expressed his deep regret that circumstances more powerful than his will had prevented him from following the traces of the Icelandic traveler to the center of the earth. The professor was humble in his glory, and his reputation increased even more. So much honor inevitably had to create envy. It did. And since his theories, supported by solid facts, contradicted existing scientific theories on the question of core heat, he had remarkable discussions with scholars from all countries, both in person and in writing. For my part, I cannot agree with his theory of cooling. In spite of what I have seen, I believe and will always believe in core heat, but I admit that certain as yet ill-defined circumstances can modify this law under the impact of natural phenomenon. At the moment when these questions are most exciting, my uncle experienced true distress. Hans, in spite of his entreaties, had left Hamburg. The man who we owed everything to did not want to let us pay him our debt. He was overcome with longing for Iceland. "Farvel," he said one day, and with that simple word, he left for home, where he arrived safely. We were very attached to our brave eater-down hunter. In spite of his absence, he will never be forgotten by those whose lives he saved, and I certainly will not die before seeing him again. To conclude, I should add that this journey to the center of the earth caused enormous sensation worldwide. It was printed and translated in all languages. The leading newspapers snatched the main episodes from each other, which were commented on, debated, attacked, and defended with equal conviction in the camp of believers and skeptics. It was a rare thing. My uncle was able to enjoy in his lifetime all the fame that he attained, and even Mr. Barnum proposed to exhibit my uncle in the States of the Union for quite the high price. But one concern, one might even say torment, remained in the midst of this glory. One fact remained inexplicable, the one involving the compass. Now, for a scholar, such an unexplained phenomenon becomes utter torture for their intelligence. Well, heaven must have destined my uncle to be completely happy. One day, while I was arranging a collection of minerals in his study, I noticed that famous compass in a corner, and I began to examine it. It had been sitting there for 6 months, unaware of all the trouble it was causing us. But suddenly, what amazement! I shouted, and the professor came running. "What's the matter?" he said. "The compass!" "Well?" "Its needle! It's pointing south, not north." "What are you saying?" "Look! Its poles have been reversed." "Reversed?" My uncle looked at it, compared, and then he made the house shake with a gigantic leap. What light broke on his spirit and on mine at the exact same moment. "So then," he said, as soon as he was able to speak, "after we arrived at Cape Sakmussen, the needle of this damn compass was pointing south instead of north?" "Obviously," I told him. "Well, that's the explanation for all of our mistakes. But what phenomenon caused the reversal of the poles?" "Nothing easier for that," I told him. "Do tell, Axel." "During the storm, on the Lindenbrock Sea, that ball of fire which magnetized all the iron on the raft, well, it very simply reversed the poles on our compass." "Ah," said the professor, and he started to laugh. "So it was an electrical trick." And from that day on, the professor was the happiest of scholars, and I was the happiest of men, for my pretty Vierland girl, resigning her place as my uncle's ward, took up position in the house in the double capacity of now his niece and my wife. No need to add that her uncle, the illustrious Otto Lindenbrock, corresponding member of all the scientific, geographical, and mineralogical societies on the 5 continents of the earth, was quite pleased. And that is the end of our story. That was a lot of fun. Like, I'm not sure that I'm entirely satisfied with the ending. I mean, being blown out of a volcano. But a lot of times when I'm reading and I get to the end of a story, I think I'm not satisfied because I'm never ready to let the story go. And I want more. I wanted them to get to the center of the earth. I mean, if we're going to go, we should go all the way. And this definitely makes me want a little bit more Jules Verne. That was a fun story. All right. So there will be or there should be already. I'm going to put up the post. I have gone through the old books that I found and found something that can be added in. I'm going to put up a poll for our next book. I'm not sure exactly what day we'll start it. I think tomorrow night we're just going to maybe talk a little bit about Jules Verne and all the other authors that we have talked about. And I'll probably show all the books that are our next public domain reading book that we could go to read from. But yeah, that was a fun ride. I definitely have to find more Jules Verne because I enjoyed a lot of that book. I hope you did too. Thank you so much for joining me on our journey to the center of the earth. Please do leave a thumbs up on your way out. It does always make me smile. Make sure that you're subscribed if you would like to journey along on yet more adventures through the public domain, and I will see you next time.